I stared at my sister Vanessa's latest text message, my jaw clenched so tight I could feel a headache forming at my temples. The blue light of my phone illuminated my face in the darkness of my apartment as I read her words for the third time. You've always been so selfish. Mom and Dad left you the house because they felt sorry for you. The least you could do is help your family when we need it. I tossed my phone onto the couch and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights below. This wasn't just about the money she was asking for. This was about years of her treating me like I was nothing. Like my choices meant nothing. Like I was the family failure while she was the golden child who could do no wrong. And now, after everything, she had the audacity to demand that I fund her lifestyle because family helps family. What Vanessa didn't know, what none of them knew, was exactly how much I was worth. And part of me, a part I wasn't proud of, couldn't wait to see her face when she finally found out. The fight had started 3 days ago at our cousin Maya's engagement party. I'd been nursing a glass of champagne in the corner, watching as Vanessa held court in the center of the room, showing off her designer dress and the diamond tennis bracelet her husband Greg had bought her for their anniversary. Every few minutes, she'd glance in my direction, her smile tight, her eyes assessing my simple black dress and minimal jewelry. "Alex," she'd called across the room, waving me over. "Come tell everyone about your little apartment. Isn't it cute how you've managed to make the best of such a small space?" I'd felt my cheeks burn as I approached the group. Our Aunt Patricia raised an eyebrow, looking me up and down. "Still working at that nonprofit, dear? Such a waste of your education." "I enjoy my work," I said quietly, knowing it wouldn't matter. Vanessa laughed, the sound like glass breaking. "Alex has always been idealistic. Meanwhile, Greg just closed another major deal, and we've put a deposit down on a vacation home in the Hamptons." I nodded, taking a sip of my champagne. I could have told them then. I could have mentioned that. My little nonprofit job was actually my own foundation, that I'd built a tech company from the ground up and sold it for 8 figures 3 years ago. I could have mentioned that my little apartment was actually the penthouse of the building I owned. But I didn't. I'd learned long ago that Vanessa would always find a way to make my successes about her. As the night wore on, I overheard her, talking to our cousin. "It's sad, really. Alex just doesn't know how to apply herself. Dad left her the house because he knew she'd never be able to afford one on her own." I gripped my glass tighter. Our father had left me the family home because I was the one who'd cared for him during his final years, the one who'd put my life on hold to be there for him while Vanessa was too busy with her social calendar. But in her version of the story, it was just another example of how I needed help, how I couldn't manage on my own. The text had come the morning after the party. Vanessa explaining that they needed $50,000 for the Hamptons house deposit. "Since you got the family home for free, it's only fair you help us," she'd written. I hadn't responded. Then came another text. And another. Each one more demanding than the last, each one twisting the knife a little deeper. Now, standing at my window, I made a decision. For years I'd kept my success quiet. Partly because I valued my privacy, partly because I didn't want relationships based on what I could give. People. But Vanessa had pushed too far. My phone buzzed again, and I knew without looking that it would be her, demanding a response, demanding money, demanding the validation that she was right about me, that I was the failure she'd always made me out to be. I took a deep breath and picked up my phone, dialing a number I rarely used. "Michael? It's Alex. I think it's time we moved forward with that profile piece." Michael, my publicist, had been pushing for months to have me do a feature in Forbes about young tech entrepreneurs who'd made it big. I'd always refused. Until now. "Really?" He sounded shocked. "What changed your mind?" I smiled, feeling a strange calm settle over me. "Let's just say I'm tired of hiding, and I think it's time for a family reunion." Our family had always had a clear hierarchy. Vanessa at the top, me somewhere near the bottom. It started when we were children. Vanessa, 2 years older, was the achiever. She brought home perfect report cards, won talent shows, and captained sports teams. I was quieter, more introspective, more interested in computers than competitions. Our parents never explicitly said they favored her, but they didn't need to. It was in the way they cleared their schedules for her recitals, but asked me if my science fair was really that important. It was in how they framed her successes as brilliant accomplishments and mine as pleasant surprises. Alex has always been the sensitive one, my mother would say, as if sensitivity was a flaw rather than a strength. Vanessa knows what she wants. What Vanessa wanted from an early age was recognition. What I wanted was to be left alone to build things. While she was winning homecoming queen, I was coding in my bedroom, teaching myself programming languages, and dreaming of creating something that would change the world. No one paid much attention. Why would they? Vanessa was dating the quarterback, while I was the weird kid who took apart computers for fun. College only cemented our roles. Vanessa went to an Ivy League school on our parents' dime, joined a sorority, and married Greg, her college sweetheart from a good family. I got a scholarship to a state school with a strong computer science program, lived in a tiny apartment with 3 roommates, and spent most weekends working on what would eventually become my company. The idea came to me during junior year. Platform that could connect people with rare medical conditions to clinical trials and experimental treatments. My roommate Zoe's brother had died from a rare form of cancer, and she'd told me how impossible it had been to find treatment options. If only there had been a way to see every possibility, she'd said through tears one night. Maybe he would have had a chance. I spent 2 years developing the algorithm, another year building the platform. I maxed out credit cards, took out loans, ate ramen for months on end. When I finally launched, I had exactly $143 left in my bank account. The platform, MedMatch, was an overnight success. Within 6 months, we had over 10,000 users. Within a year, we'd facilitated connections to treatments that had saved lives. Venture capital firms came calling. I expanded, hired, grew the company beyond what I'd imagined possible, all while my family continued to see me as the underachiever. "Still playing with your computer stuff?" my father had asked the Christmas before he got sick. I was already a millionaire on paper by then, but I just nodded and passed him the potatoes. Vanessa swooped around the table, refilling wine glasses. "Alex is practically a hermit, Dad. No real job, no relationship, just hunched over a laptop all day." She sighed dramatically. I worry about her social development. I remember catching my mother's eye across the table, seeing the concern there, the pity. It would have been so easy to tell them the truth, that I had a team of 30 people working for me, that doctors were calling my platform revolutionary, that I had turned down acquisition offers in the millions. But I stayed silent. Part of me was waiting for them to show interest, to ask real questions about my life. Part of me knew they never would. When Dad got sick 2 years later, I moved back home to care for him. Vanessa was too busy with her social obligations and Greg's career events. I set up a small office in my old bedroom, running the company remotely while administering Dad's medications and taking him to treatments. He never knew what I did. Not really. He'd ask occasionally about that website thing, but his eyes would glaze over when I tried to explain. In his final days, he asked me to promise I'd take care of the house he was leaving to me. "Your sister has Greg," he said weakly. "She'll be provided for, but you need something stable, Alex." I didn't correct him. What was the point? In his mind, I was still the struggling daughter who needed help. Maybe it was easier for him that way. After he died, Vanessa was furious about the house. "I have children to think about," she'd hissed at the reading of the will. "What do you need a 4-bedroom house for? You're alone." I sold the house 6 months later and poured the Money into MedMatch. We developed new features, expanded internationally, helped more patients find treatments. The day we hit 1 million users, I received an offer from a major health tech conglomerate. 8 figures. Life-changing money. I accepted, stepped back from day-to-day operations, and established the foundation to ensure the platform would always be accessible to those who needed it most. All while Vanessa continued to treat me like the family charity case. Now, as Michael worked on arranging the Forbes profile, I found myself wondering, had I kept my success secret out of modesty? Or had I been protecting Vanessa from the truth? Had I been sparing her feelings, or avoiding the confrontation that would inevitably come? My phone buzzed again. Another text. I know you read my messages. Stop being so selfish and call me back. 6 years of condescension, of dismissal, of being treated like I was worth less than her. Maybe it was time she learned just how much I was actually worth. The next morning, I woke to an email from Michael with the subject line, Forbes confirmed, interview next Tuesday. I felt a flicker of nervousness. Once this article went live, there would be no going back. My carefully constructed privacy would disappear. My wealth would become public knowledge. And more importantly, my family would finally know the truth. Was I really going to do this just to prove a point to Vanessa? I sat with that question as I made my morning coffee, looking out at the Manhattan skyline from my kitchen window. The sun glinted off glass buildings, creating that magical early morning light that made the city look almost ethereal. I had worked hard for this view, for this life. Why was I still letting Vanessa's opinion matter? Before I could talk myself out of it, my phone rang. It was Zoe, my former roommate and now the COO of the foundation. Have you seen the email from the Children's Hospital? She asked without preamble. They've identified 10 more candidates for the experimental treatment. If we can fast-track the funding, these kids could start next month. And just like that, my perspective shifted. This wasn't about Vanessa. It wasn't about proving my worth to someone who had never valued me. It was about being able to do more good, to help more people. The Forbes profile would bring attention to the foundation, potentially attract more donors, more partners. I'll transfer the funds today, I told Zoe, and I'm doing the Forbes interview on Tuesday. Finally, I could hear the smile in her voice. It's about time people knew what you've accomplished, and who knows, maybe now your sister will stop treating you like you're living in a cardboard box. I laughed, but it felt hollow. She's asking for money again. $50,000 for a down payment on a vacation home. Zoe's sigh was audible. And let me guess, she hasn't asked how you're doing once since your dad died? Not unless you count asking. If I've found a real job yet at Christmas. You know what? Zoe's voice took on the determined tone I recognized from our late-night study sessions. Do the interview, let her read about your success with everyone else, and then when she calls, because we both know she will, you can decide whether you want her in your life on your terms. After we hung up, I pulled up Vanessa's text messages again. There were 3 more since last night, each more demanding than the last. I know you have the money from selling Dad's house. You owe us this. Greg says you're being manipulative by ignoring me. This is so typical of you. Fine, be that way. But don't come crawling to us when you finally realize you can't make it on your own. Each message twisted something inside me. A familiar pain, the wound of never being good enough in my sister's eyes. But beneath that pain was something new, anger. Not the hot, reactive anger that had flared up at the engagement party, but something cooler and more resolute. I was done letting Vanessa define my worth. I texted her back a first in 3 days. Can we meet for coffee on Thursday? We should talk about this in person. Her response was immediate. Finally, Morton's at 2 p.m. Don't be late. Morton's was Vanessa's favorite upscale cafe, the kind of place where she could be seen with the right people. Of course, she'd choose somewhere public, somewhere she could control the narrative if I got emotional. Vanessa had always been strategic about maintaining appearances. I confirmed the time and then called Michael back to discuss the Forbes piece. "They want to photograph you at your apartment," he said, "and they're particularly interested in the foundation's work with pediatric patients." "That's fine," I replied, "but I want to make sure we emphasize that the platform is still free for patients. This isn't about making money. It's about connecting people with life-saving treatments." "Of course," Michael assured me, "though they're definitely going to ask about the sale price." I hesitated. "I'm okay discussing figures in general terms, but make sure they understand the majority went back into the foundation." After hanging up, I opened my laptop and transferred $1.5 million to the Children's Hospital Fund. It would cover not just the 10 new candidates, but potentially dozens more. This was what mattered, not Vanessa's approval, not proving her wrong, but using what I'd built to make a difference. Yet as I confirmed the transfer, I couldn't help. But imagine her face when she realized the truth. The sister she'd dismissed as useless, as a failure, had built something meaningful, something valuable. The sister who couldn't make it on her own had made it beyond what any of them could have imagined. I spent the rest of the day preparing for the week ahead. The Forbes interview would require careful planning: what to share, what to keep private, how to frame the story of MedMatch in a way that might inspire others. I didn't want to come across as boastful or focused on the money. The platform's success wasn't about making me rich. It was about creating a tool that saved lives. By evening, I had a tentative outline for the interview and had exchanged several emails with the foundation team about upcoming initiatives. I was just about to order dinner when my phone buzzed, with a text from an unexpected source. "My Aunt Patricia. Alexandra, darling, I heard from Vanessa that you're struggling again. If you need help finding proper employment, Gregory's firm is always looking for administrative assistants. No experience necessary." I stared at the message, momentarily speechless. This was what Vanessa was telling the family? That I was unemployed and struggling, even after inheriting the house? For a moment, I considered responding with the truth. But something stopped me. Thursday was only 3 days away. Let Vanessa maintain her fiction until then. Let her believe she still held all the cards. Instead, I replied with a simple, "Thank you for thinking of me, Aunt Patricia. I'm actually doing quite well, but I appreciate your concern." As I set my phone down, I felt strangely calm. Thursday couldn't come soon enough. The morning of the Forbes interview arrived with a flurry of activity. The photographer and journalist, Elaine Chen, arrived promptly at 9, bringing with them lighting equipment and an air of professional curiosity. My penthouse, usually my private sanctuary, suddenly felt like a stage set. "This view is incredible," Elaine remarked, walking straight to the floor-to-ceiling windows that showcased Central Park and the city beyond. "How long have you lived here?" "Almost 2 years," I replied, watching as her eyes widened slightly. The property had made headlines when I purchased it, not that anyone had connected it to me at the time. I'd bought it through an LLC, one of many privacy measures I'd put in place after the company sale. "And before that?" she asked, pulling out her recorder. I smiled. "A much smaller place in Brooklyn. When I was building MedMatch, I lived as frugally as possible. Every dollar went back into the company. The interview flowed from there. My background, my education, the inspiration behind MedMatch. Elaine was thorough, asking about technical challenges, funding struggles, the moment I realized the platform was going to succeed. Through it all, the photographer circled, capturing candid moments and posed shots against the backdrop of my home and the city beyond. "You've been remarkably private about your success," Elaine noted, glancing around at the subtle luxury of my apartment. "Most tech founders in your position would have been on magazine covers years ago. Why stay under the radar?" It was the question I'd been expecting, the one I'd prepared for. but I still felt a moment of hesitation. How much of my family dynamic did I want to share with the world? I believe in letting the work speak for itself, I said finally. MedMatch was never about me. It was about creating a solution to a problem that affects thousands of families. The platform's success is measured by lives impacted, not by my personal profile. Elaine nodded, but her expression told me she sensed there was more to the story. And yet, here we are. What changed your mind about this interview? I took a deep breath. The foundation is entering a new phase. We're expanding our reach globally, partnering with research institutions in countries where rare disease treatments are even harder to access. To do that effectively, we need more visibility, more partnerships. It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth either. Elaine seemed to understand this, but she didn't push further. Instead, she shifted to questions about the foundation's work, the impact metrics, the future. By the time they left 3 hours later, I felt drained but satisfied. The piece would run in next month's issue, with a digital version releasing a week earlier. Just in time for my coffee meeting with Vanessa. After they left, I sat in the sudden quiet of my apartment, thinking about how much of myself I had just shared with a stranger while keeping so much hidden from my own family. The irony wasn't lost on me. My phone buzzed with a text from Zoe. "How did it go? Did you show them the wall?" I smiled. The wall was my private pride, a display of letters from patients who had found successful treatments through MedMatch. I'd shown it to Elaine at the end of the interview, and her reaction had been everything I'd hoped for. Understanding, respect, a recognition that this was what truly mattered. "I did. I think it made an impression," I texted back. "She's going to feature the foundation prominently." "Good. And Thursday? Are you ready for Hurricane Vanessa?" Was I? I walked to my home office, where a stack of financial documents sat neatly on my desk. Account statements, the foundation's annual report, a copy of the acquisition agreement with identifying details redacted, all the evidence of a life Vanessa knew nothing about. Did I really need to bring these to coffee? Was I really going to lay out proof of my success like I needed to justify myself to her? No. That wasn't the point of this meeting. This wasn't about proving my worth with dollar signs and accolades. It was about finally being honest about who I was and what I'd built, and about setting boundaries with someone who had never respected them. I put the documents away and instead pulled up the draft of the Foundation's new pediatric initiative on my laptop. This was what mattered. This was what I wanted to focus on. My phone rang again, Michael this time. "Elaine just called me," he said without preamble. "She loves you. The piece is going to be fantastic. They're even talking about bumping it up to the cover." My stomach dropped. "The cover? Is that necessary?" Michael laughed. "Most people would be thrilled. This is going to be huge for the foundation, Alex. Exactly what we wanted. Exactly what we wanted." Yes. This was about the foundation, about expanding our reach, helping more people. Not about Vanessa. But as I hung up, I couldn't help but imagine her face when she saw the magazine. The shock, the disbelief, the realization that everything she thought she knew about me was wrong. Would there be pride? Happiness for my success? Or would there just be anger that I had kept this from her? That I had defied the role she had assigned me in our family story? Somewhere deep down, a small part of me still hoped for her approval, for her to finally see me as an equal, maybe even to admire what I had accomplished. But the rational part of me knew better. Vanessa had never been able to celebrate my successes, even the small ones. Why would this be any different? Thursday was going to change everything, one way or another. I just hoped I was ready for the fallout. I spent Wednesday preparing for my meeting with Vanessa, but not in the way she might have expected. I wasn't rehearsing explanations or justifications for why I couldn't give her the money. Instead, I was finalizing partnership agreements with 3 international research hospitals and sitting in on a virtual presentation from our development team about new features for the patient portal. Work had always been my refuge, the place where I knew my value without question. In the world of MedMatch, I wasn't Alex the disappointing sister. I was Alexandra Reeves, founder and visionary, someone whose ideas had changed lives. "You're distracted today," remarked Dr. Patel, our chief medical advisor, after I'd asked him to repeat a question during our afternoon call. "Sorry," I said, refocusing on the data on my screen. "I have a challenging family situation tomorrow." Dr. Patel, who had been with MedMatch since the early days, knew some of my history with Vanessa. "Ah," he said, his voice softening with understanding. "The famous sister. Will you be telling her about Forbes?" "Not directly, but she'll find out soon enough." "Good," he said firmly. "It's about time your family recognized what you've accomplished." After the call ended, I found myself staring at my phone, looking at Vanessa's last text. "Don't forget, Morton's at 2. And please dress appropriately. The last time we went out, you looked like you were going to a college lecture." The criticism stung, even now. Vanessa had always been immaculately put together, following every fashion trend, investing in designer pieces that signaled her status. I preferred comfort, well-made but simple clothes that didn't draw attention. In her eyes, this was just another failure on my part, another way I didn't measure up. I put the phone down and walked to my closet, pushing past everyday clothes to the section I reserved for important meetings. The Forbes photographer had encouraged me to wear something that felt authentic but elevated for the photos. I'd chosen a simple black dress with clean lines and subtle tailoring, paired with my grandmother's pearl earrings. The only family heirloom I'd insisted on keeping. Would I wear something similar tomorrow? Part of me wanted to show up exactly as Vanessa expected, underdressed, underwhelming, and then watch her face when the truth came out. But that felt petty. This meeting wasn't about scoring points. It was about finally stepping out of the shadow I'd allowed myself to remain in for too long. I selected a charcoal gray suit that my stylist had insisted brought out the CEO energy she claimed I suppressed too often. Understated but unmistakably expensive. The kind of outfit that would make Vanessa look twice, even before I said a word. That evening, Zoe came over with takeout from our favorite Thai place and 2 bottles of wine. "Pre-game strategy session," she announced, setting out containers on my dining table. "You need moral support before facing the dragon lady." I laughed, grateful for her presence. Zoe had witnessed the worst of Vanessa's behavior over the years and had never understood why I put up with it. "It's not a battle, Zoe. It's just coffee." She pointed her chopsticks at me accusingly. "Bull. This is the culmination of 20+ years of her treating you like garbage. Don't pretend you're not nervous." She was right. Beneath my calm exterior, anxiety churned. Would Vanessa lash out, try to manipulate me, make me feel guilty for not immediately agreeing to her demands? Or worse, would she somehow make me doubt myself, fall back into old patterns where her approval seemed necessary for my existence? "I'm not giving her the money," I said firmly, more to convince myself than Zoe. "That's not what this meeting is about." "Good." Zoe topped off my wine glass. "Because you know what she'd do with it, right? She'd take that vacation house and post about it incessantly on social media, never once acknowledging your help. She'd probably tell people Greg got a bonus or something." I winced, knowing she was right. Vanessa's social media was a carefully curated showcase of her perfect life. The beautiful home, the talented children, the romantic getaways with Greg. Each post designed to generate envy, to prove she was winning at life. "What if she cries?" I asked quietly. "You know she's good at that. The perfect tears that make everyone rush to comfort her." Zoe's expression softened. Then you remember all the times you cried alone because she was too busy to care. You remember that her tears are a weapon, not a weakness, and you hold your ground. After Zoe left, I couldn't sleep. I kept playing out different versions of tomorrow's meeting in my head. In some, Vanessa stormed out in anger. In others, she tried to guilt me into changing my mind. In the worst scenarios, she somehow twisted everything to make me the villain, just as she'd done throughout our childhood. Around 3 a.m, I gave up on sleep and went to my office. I pulled up the Foundation's latest impact report, 12,467 patients connected to clinical trials in the past year alone, 843 of whom had accessed treatments unavailable through other channels. 36 children with rare genetic disorders who had defied their prognoses. 18 adults who had been told to get their affairs in order who were now in remission. This was real. This was valuable. This was worth more than Vanessa's approval or disapproval. Whatever happened tomorrow, I wouldn't lose sight of that. As dawn broke over the city, I made a decision. I would go to coffee with Vanessa. I would listen to what she had to say. But I wouldn't let her definitions of success and failure dictate my responses. For once, I would enter a conversation with my sister as the person I had become, not the person she thought I was. I arrived at Morton's 15 minutes early, deliberately choosing a quiet corner table with a view of the entrance. I wanted to see Vanessa before she saw me, to have that moment of preparation. The waitress, noting my designer suit and the quiet confidence I'd worked hard to cultivate, addressed me with a deference Vanessa would appreciate. I ordered a sparkling water and watched the door. At exactly 2:05 p.m., Vanessa was never precisely on time, always slightly late to establish dominance. She swept in. Her blonde hair was freshly highlighted, her makeup flawless, her cream-colored dress likely purchased specifically for this meeting. She scanned the cafe with practiced casualness until she spotted me. Then her expression shifted into the artificial warmth she reserved for public encounters. "Alex, darling," she cooed as she approached, air-kissing both my cheeks, her eyes already evaluating my appearance. I caught the flicker of surprise as she registered my outfit, the subtle quality signals she was trained to notice. "You look different." "Thank you," I replied simply, not offering any explanation. "I ordered water. Would you like something else?" Vanessa settled across from me, arranging herself carefully, crossing her legs at the ankle like our mother had taught us. "A latte, please," she told the hovering waitress. "Non-fat milk, no sugar." As soon as the waitress left, her demeanor changed, the warmth cooling several degrees. "So, you finally decided to respond to my messages." I took a sip of my water, giving myself a moment before responding. "Yes, I thought we should discuss this in person." She leaned forward slightly, her voice lowering. "There's nothing to discuss, Alex. We need the money for the house. We put down an initial deposit, but the full amount is due next week. It's only fair that you contribute, considering how much Mom and Dad gave you." There it was again, the assertion that everything I had was given to me, that I hadn't earned my place. It stung, even now, even knowing the truth. "What makes you think I have $50,000 available?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. Vanessa rolled her eyes. "Please, you sold Dad's house for over $1 million. Even with your financial management skills, you couldn't have gone through all of that." The condescension in her voice was so familiar it almost felt comfortable. This was the dynamic we'd always had. Vanessa assuming incompetence on my part, me accepting her judgment. "You're right," I said carefully. "I didn't go through all of it." Her eyes lit up with triumph. "So you admit you have the money. Good. I'll have Greg send over the wire details. We need it by Tuesday." The waitress returned with Vanessa's latte, placing it delicately in front of her. Vanessa didn't acknowledge her, already pulling out her phone, presumably to text Greg about the money. "I didn't say I was giving you the money, Vanessa. her fingers, froze over her phone screen. "Excuse me?" I said. "I'm not giving you $50,000 for a vacation home." Vanessa's expression darkened. "Is this a joke? You have the money. You don't need it. We're family." "Yes, we're family," I agreed. "Which is why I'm curious why this is the first time you've reached out in months, and it's to ask for money." Had the grace to look momentarily flustered before recovering. "Don't be dramatic. We see each other at family functions. When was the last time you called just to ask how I was doing? Or invited me to dinner? Or showed any interest in my life?" "At all." Vanessa waved a dismissive hand. "We're adults with busy lives. I don't have time for weekly check-ins. And let's be honest, it's not like you've had much going on to discuss." I felt that familiar twinge, the pain of being dismissed, diminished. But this time, it was accompanied by something else. Clarity. This was why I'd kept my success private. Because Vanessa had never been interested in seeing me succeed. My achievements threatened the narrative she'd constructed about our places in the world. "You have no idea what's going on in my life," I said quietly. "You've never asked." She sighed dramatically. "Fine. How's your little nonprofit job? Are you still filing papers or whatever it is you do?" The condescension was so blatant it was almost laughable. I took another sip of water, studying my sister's face. The perfectly sculpted eyebrows raised in feigned interest, the slight smirk indicating she was already planning how to steer the conversation back to the money. "I don't work for a nonprofit," I said. "I run a foundation, one that I started and funded myself." Vanessa blinked, clearly not expecting this correction. "Whatever. The point is, you have money you're not using. Money that could help your sister, your family, unless you're saying Dad's house didn't sell for what we thought." I could have corrected her again, could have explained the difference between working for a nonprofit and running a foundation, could have told her about MedMatch, about the sale, about the lives changed. But looking at her across the table, I realized she wasn't ready to hear it. She wasn't here to understand me. She was here to get what she wanted. "The house sold for exactly what you think," I said. "But that money is gone." "Gone?" Her voice rose sharply, drawing glances from nearby tables. She leaned forward, lowering her tone to a hiss. "What do you mean, gone? What did you do, Alex? Gamble it away? Make another one of your investments that never pays off?" Years ago, I'd tried to get Vanessa to invest in MedMatch's seed round. She and Greg had laughed at the idea, calling it Alex's little computer project. Now, those early investors had seen returns in the thousands of %. But Vanessa didn't know that. She still thought of me as the failure, the dreamer with no business sense. "The money went exactly where it needed to go," I said calmly. "And I'm not in a position to give you $50,000 for a vacation home." Vanessa's face flushed with anger. "You selfish, ungrateful—" She cut herself off, visibly recomposing her features into a mask of hurt disappointment. "I can't believe you're doing this to me. After everything I've done for you." I raised an eyebrow. "What exactly have you done for me, Vanessa?" Vanessa's mouth opened and closed, her perfectly glossed lips momentarily unable to form a response. The question hung between us, heavier than I'd intended. What had she done for me? In her worldview, probably a great deal. In reality? "I've always looked out for you," she finally said, the words coming out slightly strangled. "I introduced you to potential employers at parties. I gave you fashion advice. I've included you in family events that I was already invited to," I interrupted gently. "Those were family gatherings, Vanessa, not private events you arranged for my benefit." Her eyes narrowed. "This is so typical of you. Always the victim, always unappreciative. You have no idea how much I've had to carry this family. While you were off playing with computers, I was the one maintaining relationships, organizing holidays, making sure mom and dad were taken care of. I nearly laughed at the last part. I was the one who moved back home when dad got sick. I was there every day for 2 years while you visited once a month at most. Because I have children, I have responsibilities. I couldn't just drop everything, like you could. There it was again. The implication that my life, my work, had been somehow less important, less real than hers. That I could just drop everything because what I was doing didn't matter. I ran a company remotely while caring for our dying father, I said quietly. I didn't drop everything. I made a choice about priorities. Vanessa scoffed. A company? Is that what you call your little website? Don't exaggerate, Alex. It's embarrassing. Something inside me shifted. All these years, I'd let Vanessa define me, diminish me. I'd accepted her version of my life as somehow more accurate than my own experience. But sitting across from her, now watching her dismissal of my work that had saved lives, created jobs, changed an industry, I felt a strange sense of freedom. Her opinion simply didn't matter anymore. You know what, Vanessa? You're right. I was exaggerating. I smiled placidly and took another sip of water. She seemed momentarily thrown by my agreement, suspicion flitting across her features. So, you admit it wasn't really a company? Oh no, it was definitely a company. But calling it little would be the exaggeration. I pulled out my phone and opened the browser to an archived news article from 2 years ago. I slid it across the table to her. Here, this might interest you. Vanessa glanced down at the screen, irritation clear in her expression. The headline was simple. Health tech startup MedMatch acquired for $157 million. Below it was a stock photo of a medical facility, no mention of my name. What is this supposed to be? She asked, barely glancing at the article. That little website I was working on. The company I built while you were telling everyone I was unemployed. She pushed the phone back toward me. I don't understand. What? This has to do with anything. I founded MedMatch, I said simply. I was the CEO. I sold it 2 years ago. Vanessa stared at me, her perfectly arched eyebrows drawing together. That's not possible. Which part? That I built a successful company? Or that I sold it for 9 figures? Her laugh was sharp, disbelieving. You expect me to believe you're secretly some tech millionaire? Please, Alex, I know exactly how much money you have. The inheritance. From Dad. If you had millions, you wouldn't live in that tiny apartment. You wouldn't wear the same clothes for years. You wouldn't be working at some obscure foundation. It was fascinating, really, how firmly she clung to her established narrative. About me. Even when presented with evidence to the contrary, how she would rather believe I was lying than consider that she had been wrong all these years. I don't live in a tiny apartment, I said calmly. I own the penthouse of my building. I wear simple clothes because I prefer them. And the obscure foundation you're referring to is the MedMatch Foundation, which I established after selling the company. I'm the president and primary donor. Vanessa's face flushed, her fingers tightening around her latte. This is ridiculous. You're making this up to avoid helping me. Why would I make up something so easily verifiable? I pulled out my phone again, opened the banking app, and showed her the balance of just one of my accounts. Her eyes widened almost comically as she registered the number. 7 figures, far more than the house sale could explain. That's... she began, then stopped, recalibrating. Her expression shifted rapidly. Shock, disbelief, and then something calculating. That's incredible, Alex. Why didn't you tell us? We're family. The sudden warmth in her voice made my skin crawl. This was Vanessa in adaptation mode, quickly adjusting her approach based on new information. If I was wealthy, then suddenly I was worth her attention, her respect. Would it have mattered? I asked quietly. Would knowing I was successful have changed how you treated me? Or would you have just asked for money sooner? She recoiled slightly, affronted. That's unfair. Of course it would have mattered. I would have been proud of you. The way you were proud when I graduated with honors, or when I got that fellowship in college, or any of the other achievements you dismissed because they didn't fit your narrative about me. Vanessa's expression hardened, the mask of warmth slipping. So that's it? You've been hiding your success to what? Punish us? Make us feel bad? Is this some kind of revenge because you think we didn't pay enough attention to you growing up? I sighed, suddenly tired of the whole conversation. No, Vanessa. I kept my success private because it was mine. Because for once in my life, I wanted something that wasn't about our family dynamic or your approval. The only reason you know now is because you asked me for money, not because you showed any genuine interest in my life. She was silent for a long moment, her mind clearly racing, recalculating. I could almost see her adjusting her entire worldview to accommodate this new information, trying to find a way to position herself advantageously. Well, she finally said, her voice artificially bright, this changes everything. We should celebrate. We should tell the family. And of course, now the vacation house won't be a problem at all. There it was, the pivot I'd expected. In Vanessa's mind, my newfound wealth wasn't something I'd earned. It was a family resource, something she was entitled to access. I'm not giving you $50,000, Vanessa, I said firmly. Or any amount for that matter. Her smile faltered. But you just showed me you have millions. Surely you can spare a tiny fraction for your sister. I could, I agreed. But I won't. Not for a vacation home. Not when you've spent years treating me like I was worth less than you. Vanessa's face hardened, the pleasant mask dropping entirely. So this is about revenge. You've been successful, and now you want to lord it over us, make us beg. Is that it? No, I said, keeping my voice even. This isn't about revenge. It's about boundaries. For years, I've let you dictate the terms of our relationship. I've accepted your judgment, your condescension, your dismissal of my choices. That ends today. Boundaries? She practically spat the word. We're family. There aren't supposed to be boundaries. That's exactly the problem, I replied. You've always treated me like an extension of yourself, someone whose resources, emotional, financial, whatever, should be accessible to you without question. But I'm my own person, Vanessa. I make my own choices about my life and my money. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a hiss. You're making a mistake. If you think this little power play is going to work out well for you, you're wrong. When the family finds out how selfish you're being, what will they find out exactly? I interrupted. That your wealthy sister wouldn't buy you a vacation home? I'm not sure that's the devastating revelation you think it is. Vanessa's fingers tightened around her cup. They'll find out you've been lying to all of us for years, hiding your success, pretending to be something you're not. I never lied, I corrected her. I just didn't volunteer information that no one bothered to ask about. Not once did anyone in our family show genuine interest in what I was building. Not once did you ask me about my work without dismissing it in the same breath. She scoffed. Oh, please. You were playing the martyr as usual. Poor Alex, so misunderstood, so overlooked. You could have shared your success at any time. To what end? So you could take credit for it somehow? Tell everyone how you always supported me? Or maybe just to have access to my money sooner? Her silence was answer enough. I watched as calculations ran behind her eyes, strategies forming and discarding as she tried to find the right approach. Look, she finally said, her tone softening, artificially. Maybe we got off on the wrong foot here. I'm genuinely happy for your success, Alex. Really, I am. And I'm sorry if I've been dismissive in the past. I didn't understand what you were working on. I almost admired the pivot, the sudden contrition, the strategic apology. It was classic Vanessa, adapting to new information with chameleon-like agility. But there was no genuine reflection in her eyes, just the same calculating look I'd seen 1,000 times before. "Thank you for that," I said, not believing it for a second. "But it doesn't change my answer about the money." Her facade cracked, frustration bleeding through. "God, you're being petty. Just because I didn't bow down to your tech genius or whatever. This isn't about recognition," I cut in. "It's about respect. Basic human respect, Vanessa. Something you've never shown me." "That's not true. I've always what? Treated me like the family failure? Made comments about my clothes, my job, my life choices? Told Aunt Patricia I was unemployed and struggling? Called me useless because I wouldn't immediately hand over $50,000? She had the grace to look momentarily uncomfortable at the last one. I was upset. People say things when they're upset. Yes, they do, I agreed. They say what they really think, stripped of social niceties. And what you really think is that I'm obligated to fund your lifestyle because you see yourself as more deserving, more important. Vanessa looked around the cafe, suddenly conscious of the attention our increasingly heated conversation might be drawing. "You're twisting my words," she hissed, leaning closer. "I never said I was more deserving. I said it was fair." "Fair according to whom?" "Your personal definition of fairness has always been whatever benefits Vanessa most." Her cheeks flushed with anger. "That's so unfair. I have responsibilities you don't understand, a position to maintain. Greg's career depends on certain appearances. The kids need a vacation home in the Hamptons?" I raised an eyebrow. "I think you're confusing needs with wants, Vanessa. Just like you're confusing my obligation to help family in genuine need with your entitlement to luxury." She stared at me, momentarily speechless. I'd never spoken to her this directly before, had never challenged her narrative so bluntly. For a moment, I saw something flicker in her eyes. Perhaps a glimmer of recognition that she wasn't dealing with the same compliant sister she was used to manipulating. But it passed quickly, replaced by cold fury. "You know what? Keep your money. If this is how you treat family, then you clearly don't deserve to be part of ours." The threat hung in the air between us. Exclusion. The ultimate punishment in Vanessa's mind. For a brief moment, I felt that old panic, the fear of being cast out, of losing my place, tenuous as it was, in the family structure. But then it passed, replaced by a strange calm. "Is that what you think this is about? My place in the family? Do you really believe you have the power to grant or revoke that?" Vanessa's smile was tight, triumphant. "I'm the one who organizes the holidays, who keeps in touch with the extended family, who makes sure everyone stays connected. If I decide, you're not welcome, trust me, you won't be." I considered her words, the implicit threat. Once it would have devastated me. Once, I would have done anything to avoid being ostracized, to maintain at least the illusion of belonging. But now? And what exactly would you tell them? I asked calmly. That you demanded money from me, called me useless when I hesitated, and then tried to exile me from the family when I refused? I'm not sure that story casts you in the heroic light you imagine. Her expression faltered slightly. I didn't call you. I pulled out my phone again, opened our text thread, and read aloud. "You've always been so selfish. You're useless if you can't help your own family. I don't know why Mom and Dad even bothered with you." Should I continue? Vanessa's face had gone pale. She hadn't expected receipts, hadn't considered that her words would come back to haunt her. "Those texts were private," she snapped. "You would really show our family private messages?" "I wouldn't need to," I said, softly. "Because I'm not the one threatening to cut off family members who don't comply with financial demands. That's all you, Vanessa." We sat in tense silence for a moment, the chatter of the cafe continuing around us, oblivious to the seismic shift occurring at our table. For the first time in our adult lives, I wasn't backing down. For the first time, Vanessa's manipulation tactics weren't working. "Look," she finally said, her voice tight. "Clearly we're both upset. Maybe we should take some time to cool off and discuss this later." Translation. She needed time to regroup, to formulate a new strategy now that the direct approach had failed. "There's nothing to discuss," I replied evenly. "I'm not giving you money for a vacation home. That decision isn't going to change no matter how much time passes." Vanessa lifted her chin, pride reasserting itself. "Fine. If that's your decision, I can't force you to be generous. But don't expect me to forget this, Alex. When you need something from me, and you will eventually, remember this moment." The threat was clear, but it no longer held the power it once would have. What could Vanessa possibly withhold that I actually needed? "I'll keep that in mind," I said, reaching for my purse and signaling for the check. "For what it's worth, I do hope you and Greg find a way to make the vacation house work. Maybe a mortgage?" Vanessa's expression twisted at the suggestion of a mortgage, as if I'd proposed something indecent. "A mortgage? Do you have any idea what interest rates are right now? Besides, Greg's firm has specific requirements about debt-to-income ratios for partners." I signed the check the waitress had discreetly placed on our table, leaving a generous tip. "Then perhaps it's not the right time for a vacation home. There's no shame in waiting until you can truly afford something." "We can afford it," she snapped. "We assumed." She trailed off, clearly unwilling to admit they had counted on my money before even asking me. "You assumed incorrectly," I said, gathering my things. "I should get back to work. The foundation has a board meeting this afternoon." Vanessa's eyes narrowed at the reference to my work, a reminder of the success she had so thoroughly dismissed. "This foundation of yours, is it really as important as you make it sound?" The question caught me off guard. After everything we'd discussed, she still couldn't conceive of my work having real value. In her worldview, I would always be the lesser sister, my achievements somehow smaller, less significant than her own life choices. Last year, we helped connect over 12,000 patients with treatments they couldn't access elsewhere. I said quietly. 36 children with terminal diagnoses are alive today because of our work. So yes, Vanessa, it's exactly as important as I make it sound. Possibly more so. Something flickered across her face. Doubt, perhaps. Or the first inkling that her perception of me might have been wrong all these years. But it passed quickly, replaced by her usual defensive pride. "Well," she said stiffly, "I suppose we all have our projects." I almost laughed at the diminishment, so predictable it was almost comforting. This was who Vanessa was, someone fundamentally incapable of acknowledging that I might have built something meaningful, something that mattered beyond the narrow confines of status and appearance that defined her world. "Goodbye, Vanessa," I said, standing up. "Give my love to the kids." She remained seated, her posture rigid with indignation. "That's it? You're just leaving? After dropping this bomb about your secret millions, you're just walking away?" I paused, looking down at her. "What would you prefer? That I stay and continue a conversation that's clearly going nowhere? That I apologize for not conforming to your expectations? That I hand over a check?" "I would prefer that my sister acted like family," she said, her voice taking on that wounded tone she'd perfected over years of getting her way. "That she showed some basic loyalty and generosity." "Loyalty," I repeated, tasting the word. "Have you ever shown me loyalty, Vanessa?" When I was struggling with Dad's care, when I was working around the clock to build my company, when I needed emotional support or even basic respect. "Where was your loyalty then?" She bristled. "That's completely different. I had my own responsibilities." "So, do I?" I replied simply. And right now, those responsibilities are calling me back to the office. We can talk again when you're ready to have a real conversation, one that isn't centered around what I can give you. As I turned to leave, she called after me, just loud enough to draw glances from nearby tables. You'll regret this, Alex. When the family finds out how you've been hiding things, playing the victim while secretly hoarding wealth. I turned back, meeting her gaze steadily. Is that what you think I've been doing? Hoarding wealth? While you've been posting about your designer purchases and luxury vacations, I've been funding research for rare diseases, creating scholarships for low-income students in STEM, building something that helps people who truly need it. But by all means, tell the family whatever narrative makes you feel better about this encounter. Without waiting for her response, I walked out of Morton's into the bright afternoon sunlight. My phone was already buzzing with messages. Zoe checking. In, Michael with updates about the Forbes piece, Dr. Patel with questions about the board presentation. Real responsibilities, meaningful work, people who valued what I brought to the table. I texted Zoe a quick update. It went exactly as expected. She didn't take it well. Tell you more later. Her response was immediate. Shocking. Need reinforcements? I can be at your place with wine in an hour. I smiled, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders. I'm heading to the board meeting. Rain check for tonight? Absolutely. Proud of you, by the way. I know that wasn't easy. She was right. It hadn't been easy. There was no satisfaction in watching Vanessa's worldview crumble. No pleasure in revealing the truth I'd kept hidden for so long. There was only the quiet relief of finally standing my ground, of refusing to accept the role she had assigned me. As I walked back to my office, I reflected on how much energy I'd expended over the years trying to gain Vanessa's approval, or at least mitigate her disapproval. How I'd twisted myself into shapes that were never quite right, never quite enough to earn the validation I'd craved from my older sister. My phone rang, a number I didn't recognize. I almost let it go to voicemail, then decided to answer. Alexandra Reeves, speaking. Ms. Reeves, this is Elaine Chen from Forbes. I'm just following up on a few details for the piece. Do you have a moment? I looked at my watch. The board meeting wasn't for another hour. Of course, Elaine. What do you need? We're finalizing the layout, and we'd like to use a quote as a pull-out for the introduction. I wanted to run a few options by you. She paused. Also, our editor is pushing to include more personal background. Your journey, what motivated you? Would you be open to discussing your family influences? I stopped walking, considering the question. My family influences. The sister who had never believed in me. The parents who had seen me as the less promising child. The years of proving myself to people who weren't paying attention. I'd rather focus on the foundation's work, I said finally. The personal story isn't what matters here. With respect, Ms. Reeves, readers connect with personal stories. They want to know what drives successful founders, what obstacles they overcame. Your reluctance to discuss your background actually makes it more intriguing. I resumed walking, thinking about what I wanted to share, what I wanted to keep private. The line between honesty and exposure was thin, and I'd spent so long guarding my narrative closely. My family didn't understand what I was building, I said carefully. They didn't see the potential in MedMatch, or in me for that matter. That lack of recognition was challenging, but also motivating. I learned to believe in my vision even when no one else did. There was a pause on Elaine's end, the sound of typing. That's powerful, Ms. Reeves. Would you be willing to elaborate on that dynamic, particularly with regards to your sister? Our research indicates you have an older sister who's quite active in philanthropic circles. I almost laughed. Vanessa's philanthropy consisted of attending charity galas and serving on committees where the primary qualification was the ability to write checks and look good in event photos. But there was no point in correcting this misconception. My sister and I have different definitions of success, I said diplomatically. Different values, different approaches to life. I'd prefer not to comment further on family matters. I understand, Elaine replied, though I could hear the slight disappointment in her voice. Journalists always wanted the personal drama, the emotional hook. One last question, if I may. The profile mentions your commitment to maintaining a low profile despite your success. Now that you're stepping into the spotlight with this piece, how do you anticipate your life changing? It was a good question, one I'd been considering since agreeing to the interview. The Forbes article would change things irrevocably, not just with Vanessa, but with my entire extended family, my social circles, even the way I moved through the world. I imagine some relationships will shift, I said truthfully. People tend to see you differently when they discover success they weren't previously aware of. But I'm hoping the focus will remain on the Foundation's mission, not on me personally. That's what matters. After finishing the call with Elaine, I continued toward my office, feeling strangely lightened. The conversation with Vanessa had been difficult, yes, but also clarifying. For years, I'd been living in a strange double existence. Successful and respected in my professional life, diminished and overlooked in my family life. Today, those worlds had finally collided, and while the impact had been jarring, it had also been necessary. My phone buzzed with a text notification, Vanessa again. This conversation isn't over, Alex. We need to talk about what you're going to tell the family. I smiled slightly, putting my phone away without responding. For once, Vanessa wasn't dictating the terms of our interaction. For once, I wasn't rushing to accommodate her demands. It was a small shift, but a significant one, and it felt right. The board meeting ran longer than expected, stretching into early evening as we discussed expansion plans for the Foundation's international partnerships. By the time I returned to my apartment, I was exhausted, but satisfied with the day's progress, both professionally and personally. I kicked off my heels and was about to order dinner when my phone rang. It was my Aunt Patricia. "Alexandra," she said, her voice sharp with disapproval. "I've just had a very disturbing conversation with your sister." I sighed, moving to the kitchen to pour myself a glass of wine. "I'm sure you have, Aunt Patricia. She tells me you've been keeping secrets from the family. Significant secrets." There it was. Vanessa had wasted no time spinning her narrative to the extended family. I wondered how many others she had called, how many versions of the story were already circulating. "I've been private about my professional success," I corrected carefully. "That's not quite the same as keeping secrets. She says you're worth millions and refused to help her with a simple loan for a vacation property. Is that true?" I took a sip of wine, considering my response. "Part of it is true. I declined to give Vanessa money for a vacation home. As for my net worth, that's my private business, though it seems it won't be private much longer." "What is that supposed to mean?" "There's a profile coming out in Forbes next month about MedMatch and the Foundation." There was a pause then. "Forbes? The magazine?" "Yes, Aunt Patricia. The magazine." "Well?" Her tone shifted slightly, interest overtaking indignation. "That's unexpected. Vanessa didn't mention that part." "I'm not surprised," I said dryly. "It doesn't fit the narrative of me being selfish and secretive. But darling, if you really have been successful, why keep it from family? We would have celebrated with you." Would they? I thought of all the family gatherings where my work had been dismissed, all the times Vanessa had steered conversations away from my achievements, all the ways my parents had diminished my choices as less valuable than hers. "I appreciate the sentiment," I said instead, "but my success isn't the point. The issue is Vanessa's expectation that I would simply hand over a large sum of money without question." "She's your sister," Aunt Patricia said, as if this explained everything. "Family helps family." Does it? Because I don't recall Vanessa ever offering to help me when I was building my company. I don't recall anyone in the family showing interest in what I was creating. There was an uncomfortable silence. Well, you never said you needed help. And Vanessa does? A vacation home is a need now? Aunt Patricia sighed heavily. You're being deliberately obtuse, Alexandra. There are appearances to maintain. Greg's position at the firm has nothing to do with me, I interrupted. Greg's career and their social standing are not my responsibility. And frankly, I'm tired of the implication that they are. This isn't like you, she said, her voice cooling. Success has changed you. I laughed, surprising myself with the sound. No, Aunt Patricia. Success has allowed me to stop pretending. To stop accepting the family's definition of who I am and what I'm worth. I see, she said, clearly not seeing at all. Well, your sister is very upset. The family dinner next weekend is going to be extremely uncomfortable if this isn't resolved. The family dinner. I had forgotten about it. The monthly gathering at my Uncle Robert's house, a tradition since my parents passed. Vanessa always took center stage at these events, updating everyone on her children's achievements, Greg's latest promotion, their vacation plans. I usually sat quietly, answering the occasional polite question about my job situation. I suspect it will be uncomfortable regardless, I said. But I'll be there. You still plan to attend? After how you treated your sister. I gripped the phone tighter. How I treated my sister? Aunt Patricia. Vanessa called me useless for not immediately agreeing to her demand. She's been dismissing me and my work for years. And yet somehow I'm the one who behaved badly? Another uncomfortable silence. Then, perhaps there have been misunderstandings on both sides. It was the closest thing to an acknowledgement I was likely to get from her. Perhaps, I conceded. But that doesn't change my decision about the money. And it doesn't erase years of being treated as less than by my own family. You're being dramatic, she said, but there was less conviction in her voice now. No one treated you as less than. Didn't they? When was the last time anyone asked me about my work without dismissing it in the same breath? When was the last time my choices were respected rather than questioned? When was the last time Vanessa introduced me without some subtle dig about my lifestyle or career? Aunt Patricia had no immediate response. I could almost hear her mentally reviewing past interactions, perhaps seeing them in a new light. I should go, I said finally. I have an early meeting tomorrow. Please give my love to Uncle Robert. Alexandra, she said, just before I could end the call. This Forbes article, when exactly does it come out? Despite everything, I smiled. Aunt Patricia's priorities were never hard to discern. The digital version releases in 2 weeks. The print issue hits newsstands the following week. I see. And it will mention the family? No, I assured her. I've kept the focus on the foundation's work. The family won't be mentioned. She seemed relieved. Well, that's something at least. I'll see you at dinner on Sunday then. After hanging up, I stood at my kitchen window, watching the city lights flicker on as dusk settled. The conversation with Aunt Patricia had been less confrontational than the one with Vanessa, but no less revealing. The family's perception of me was so deeply entrenched that even the possibility of my success required a fundamental recalibration. My phone buzzed with a text from my cousin Maya. Just heard from Mom, who heard from Aunt Patricia, who talked to Vanessa. What the hell is going on? Are you secretly a millionaire? I laughed, imagining the family phone tree lighting up with variations of the story. By morning, the rumors would have morphed into something barely recognizable. I texted back, not exactly secret, just private. Long story, will tell you Sunday. Maya responded immediately. Don't you dare make me wait that long. Coffee tomorrow? I want the real story, not whatever Vanessa is telling everyone. Maya had always been different from the rest of the family, less concerned with appearances, more genuine in her interactions. She was one of the few relatives who had ever shown genuine interest in my work, even if she didn't fully understand. Deal, I replied. Usual place at 10? Before she could respond, another text came through, this one from a number I didn't recognize. Ms. Reeves, this is Jason Lin from the Times. We've heard about your foundation's work in rare disease, treatment access, and would like to discuss a potential feature. Would you be available for a conversation this week? I stared at the message, momentarily confused. How had the Times gotten wind of the foundation already? The Forbes piece wasn't out yet. Unless, my phone rang again. Michael this time. Did you talk to Jason Lin? He asked without preamble. He just texted me. How does he know about the foundation? The Forbes piece isn't out yet. Michael sighed. Someone at Forbes must have mentioned it. The Times has been looking for stories on healthcare innovation, and once they heard about what we're doing with pediatric treatments, well, you're suddenly a hot commodity. I sat down, trying to process this new development. I haven't even done the first interview yet, and already there's more press interest? That's how it works, Michael said. Once you open the door a crack, everyone wants to peek inside. And frankly, your story is compelling. Brilliant founder who avoids the spotlight while building something life-changing. People are intrigued. My sister is going to lose her mind, I murmured, more to myself than to Michael. Pardon? Nothing. Just family complications. Michael paused. Is that going to be a problem? Because once the Forbes piece hits, there will be more interest, not less. Your privacy is about to become a lot harder to maintain. He was right, of course. The carefully constructed barrier between my professional success and my family life was crumbling. Soon, everyone would know, not just Vanessa and Aunt Patricia, but the entire extended family, old friends, former classmates. Everyone who had ever underestimated me, dismissed me, written me off. The thought was both terrifying and strangely liberating. It's not a problem, I said finally. Just an adjustment. Tell Jason I'll speak with him next week, after the board approves our new initiatives. I want to have something concrete to discuss. Will do. And Alex? For what it's worth, it's about time people knew what you've accomplished. After hanging up, I returned to the window, watching the city below, the flow of lights and movement, thousands of lives intersecting in complex patterns. Somewhere out there, Vanessa was probably still seething, crafting her version of events for anyone who would listen. But for the first time in my adult life, I wasn't worried about her narrative. I wasn't scrambling to minimize damage or avoid conflict. I was simply standing in my truth, comfortable with who I was and what I had built. And that, more than any financial success, felt like the real achievement. Sunday arrived more quickly than I had anticipated. The days following my confrontation with Vanessa had been a whirlwind of activity. Coffee with Maya, where I'd given her the unfiltered version of events, finalizing details for the Forbes piece, meetings with potential international partners for the foundation's expansion. I'd barely had time to prepare myself emotionally for the family dinner at Uncle Robert's house, where I knew Vanessa would be waiting with her own version of our conflict fully polished and distributed. I pulled up to the familiar Tudor-style home in the suburbs, noting Vanessa's luxury SUV already parked in the driveway alongside several other family vehicles. Taking a deep breath, I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. I'd chosen my outfit carefully. A simple but clearly high-quality dress, subtle jewelry, light makeup. Nothing flashy or ostentatious, but nothing that would reinforce the struggling Alex narrative either. As I approached the front door, I could hear the buzz of conversation inside, the familiar cadence of family voices rising and falling. For a moment, I hesitated, my hand on the ornate brass knocker. Was I ready for this? Ready to face not just Vanessa, but the entire extended family with their questions, their judgments, their reframing of our shared history. Before I could decide, the door swung open. My cousin Ethan stood there, a beer in hand, surprise registering on his face. "Alex, you came." He sounded genuinely shocked. "Was there some doubt?" I asked, stepping past him into the foyer. He shrugged, lowering his voice. "Vanessa said you two had a major blowout. Something about you refusing to help with their vacation house." "Did she mention why?" I asked, hanging my coat in the closet. Ethan took a swig of his beer. "Something about you being selfish with your inheritance." He studied my face. "But Maya said that's not the whole story." I smiled. Maya would be correct. "Care to fill me in? Because right now there are at least 3 different versions circulating, and Aunt Patricia keeps shushing everyone whenever your name comes up." I patted his arm. "All in good time, Ethan. I should probably say hello to Uncle Robert first." The living room fell into an awkward hush as I entered, conversations pausing mid-sentence as heads turned in my direction. I spotted Vanessa immediately, holding court in the center of the room, her posture stiffening as she saw me. Greg stood beside her, looking uncomfortable. My other cousins, aunts, and uncles formed a loose circle around them, many wearing expressions of poorly concealed curiosity. "Alexandra!" Uncle Robert boomed, breaking the tension as he crossed the room to embrace me. "Good to see you, kiddo. Can I get you a drink?" "White wine would be lovely, thank you," I replied, returning his hug. Uncle Robert had always been the family peacemaker, skillfully navigating tensions with jovial deflection. "Coming right up. Everyone's in the living room. We're just waiting on Thomas and his new girlfriend before we serve dinner." As Uncle Robert disappeared toward the kitchen, I turned to face the assembled family. Maya caught my eye from across the room and gave me an encouraging nod. Aunt Patricia seemed to be studying my outfit with unusual intensity, while my other, Aunt Claudia, whispered something to her husband. Vanessa remained frozen in place, her expression a careful mask of neutrality. This was new. Typically, she would have immediately approached me, established dominance with some subtle comment about my appearance or life situation. Her hesitation spoke volumes about how our meeting had shaken her confidence. I decided to take the initiative, crossing the room toward where she stood. "Hello, Vanessa. Greg? How are you both?" Greg shifted uncomfortably. "Fine. Thanks, Alex." Vanessa's smile was tight. "We're managing. Though I'm sure you've heard we had to pull out of the Hamptons property." Her tone carried a clear accusation, one designed to elicit guilt and draw sympathetic glances from the family members inevitably eavesdropping on our exchange. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said neutrally. "I'm sure you'll find a place that works. Better for your budget." Her eyes narrowed at the subtle dig. "Yes, well, plans change, sometimes unexpectedly." Uncle Robert returned with my wine, seemingly oblivious to the tension between us. "Here you go, Alex. Now who's ready for Patricia's famous spinach dip?" The conversation mercifully shifted to food, allowing me to move away from Vanessa toward Maya, who was waving me over to where she sat with her fiancé, Dev. "That was quite an entrance," Maya murmured as I joined them. "You could cut the tension with a knife." "Is it that obvious?" I asked, taking a sip of wine. Dev chuckled. "Let's just say your sister hasn't taken her eyes off you since you walked in." "What exactly happened between you two?" Maya wouldn't tell me the details. "It's complicated," I said. "But the short version is that Vanessa asked me for money, I refused, and in the process revealed that I'm significantly more financially successful than anyone in the family realized." Dev's eyebrows shot up. "How significant are we talking?" Maya elbowed him. "Don't be nosy," I laughed. Significant enough that I could have easily afforded what she asked for, which made my refusal all the more infuriating to her. "And now everyone's trying to figure out if you're secretly loaded without actually asking directly," Maya observed, glancing around at our relatives, several of whom were sneaking not-so-subtle looks in our direction. Exactly. Well, for one, I'm thrilled, Maya declared. It's about time someone put Vanessa in her place. She's been the self-appointed family queen bee for way too long. Before I could respond, Aunt Claudia approached, her curiosity evidently overcoming her restraint. Alexandra, dear, you look wonderful. That dress, is it new? I smiled, recognizing the thinly veiled fishing expedition. Thank you, Aunt Claudia. I've had it for a while, actually. She studied the fabric with renewed interest. I could have sworn I saw something similar in Saks last month, in the designer section. It's possible, I conceded, offering nothing more. She waited expectantly, but when I didn't elaborate, she tried another angle. Patricia tells me you have some sort of feature coming out in a magazine. About your work? From across the room, I noticed Vanessa's head turn sharply in our direction. She was listening intently, though pretending to be engaged in conversation with Uncle Robert's wife. Yes, Forbes is doing a piece on the foundation I run, I confirmed. Aunt Claudia's eyes widened. Forbes? The business magazine? How fascinating. And what exactly does this foundation do? I took another sip of wine, aware that the surrounding conversations had quieted as more family members tuned in to our exchange. We connect patients with rare diseases to experimental treatments and clinical trials. Last year, we helped over 12,000 people access care they couldn't find through traditional channels. There was a moment of stunned silence, then a flood of questions from all directions. You run a foundation? How long has this been going on? Did Vanessa know about this? Is this what you've been doing since college? I held up a hand, smiling, despite the interrogation. One at a time, please. Yes, I run a foundation. I started it after selling my tech company, MedMatch, a few years ago. And no, I haven't discussed it much with the family because, frankly, no one ever seemed particularly interested in my work. Another silence fell, this one heavier, more uncomfortable. Several relatives exchanged guilty glances, perhaps recalling dismissed mentions of my computer project or website thing. Aunt Patricia cleared her throat. Well, I'm sure we would have been interested if we'd known it was so substantial. That's just it, I replied evenly. The substance of my work should have been interesting regardless of its financial outcome. But that's not how our family has traditionally operated, is it? The frank assessment hung in the air, challenging years of established dynamics. From the corner of my eye, I could see Vanessa's face flushing with anger or embarrassment. Perhaps both. Uncle Thomas saved us from the increasingly awkward moment by arriving with his new girlfriend, creating a welcome distraction as introductions were made and drinks refreshed. By the time we moved to the dining room for dinner, the initial shock had subsided into a buzzing undercurrent of speculation and reassessment. I found myself seated directly across from Vanessa, a placement that could hardly be coincidental. Uncle Robert, ever the strategic host, had probably decided it was best to have us where we could see each other, but weren't close enough for private confrontation. As the first course was served, conversation flowed around safer topics. Thomas's new job, Maya's wedding plans, Ethan's recent trip to Japan. But throughout, I could feel Vanessa's gaze on me, calculating, reassessing. The power balance between us had shifted fundamentally, and neither of us was quite sure where this new equilibrium would settle. The relative peace lasted until dessert. We had almost made it through the entire meal without direct confrontation, with family members carefully navigating around the elephant in the room. Uncle Robert had masterfully steered conversations toward neutral territory whenever tensions threatened to rise. But as coffee and his famous apple tart were served, Cousin Ethan, never one for tact after a few glasses of wine, decided to address what everyone had been thinking. So, Alex, he said, leaning forward with elbows on the table, are you actually rich? Because Vanessa told everyone you were broke. But now there's talk about Forbes and foundations, and I'm confused. The table fell silent. Maya closed her eyes briefly in exasperation. Uncle Robert sighed. Vanessa's knuckles whitened around her coffee cup. I took a deliberate bite of apple tart, chewed, and swallowed before answering. I'm financially comfortable, Ethan. The company I built was acquired for a significant sum, and I've invested most of that back into the foundation and other ventures. But millionaire comfortable or just good job comfortable? He pressed, oblivious to the daggers Aunt Patricia was glaring at him. Ethan, his mother hissed, that's a terribly inappropriate question. I smiled. It's okay, I understand. The curiosity. I turned to Ethan. The acquisition was in the 9-figure range, so yes, technically, millionaire comfortable. A collective intake of breath circled the table. Even Maya, who knew the basic outlines of my financial situation, looked surprised at the specific number. 9 figures, Uncle Thomas repeated slowly. As in, over $100 million? The exact figure is confidential, I said calmly. But yes, that's the range. Greg let out a low whistle, then caught Vanessa's glare and quickly composed his features. Aunt Claudia suddenly seemed very interested in the pattern on her dessert plate, no doubt mentally recalculating years of family dynamics. But you never said anything, Aunt Patricia said, her voice caught between accusation and bewilderment. All these years at every family gathering, you let us think— Let you think what? I asked, meeting her gaze steadily. That I had a modest job at a nonprofit? That was true, in the strictest sense. I do work at a nonprofit, one that I founded and funded. I never lied about my work. I simply didn't volunteer information that no one bothered to ask about. But that's just it, Uncle Robert interjected, his usual jovial tone subdued. Why not share your success with your family? We would have celebrated with you. I looked around the table, at these familiar faces struggling to reconcile the Alex they thought they knew with the reality before them. Would you? When I tried to talk about MedMatch in its early stages, the response was dismissive at best. My work was treated as a hobby, not a serious endeavor. That's not fair, Vanessa said suddenly, breaking her lengthy silence. You were deliberately vague about what you were doing. All that technical jargon and talk about algorithms. How were we supposed to understand the significance? You didn't need to understand the technical aspects to show interest or support, I replied evenly. You needed to respect that it mattered to me, that I was passionate about it. But that never happened. Instead, my choices were constantly questioned. My path compared unfavorably to more traditional routes. Maya nodded in agreement. She's right. I remember holiday dinners where Alex would try to explain her company, and everyone would either change the subject or make jokes about her being stuck on her computer all day. Vanessa's cheeks flushed. We didn't— She stopped, seemingly unable to formulate a defense that wouldn't sound hollow given the context. Uncle Robert cleared his throat. I think what we're all trying to process, Alex, is why you felt the need to keep your success hidden, especially from your sister. Families share these things. I set down my fork, choosing my words carefully. Families also share support, encouragement, and respect. Those were in short supply when it came to my career choices. Why would I share the fruits of those choices with people who dismissed the labor that produced them? So this is punishment, Vanessa said, her voice tight. You're punishing the family for not sufficiently praising your computer project. No, I said firmly. This isn't about punishment. It's about boundaries. About deciding who gets access to which parts of my life based on how they've treated me. And the truth is, Vanessa, you've never shown genuine interest in my success unless it benefits you directly. That's absurd, she protested. I've always supported you. I raised an eyebrow. Have you? When was the last time you asked me about my work without dismissing it in the same breath? When was the last time you celebrated one of my achievements? Without immediately changing the subject to your own life? When have you ever, even once, acknowledged that my path might be valid even though it's different from yours? Vanessa opened her mouth, then closed it again, seemingly searching for examples and coming up empty. Aunt Patricia jumped to her defense. You're being unfair, Alexandra. Your sister has always looked out for you. She's introduced you to potential. Employers included you in social events. Employers I never needed, I interrupted. Social events where I was presented as the struggling younger sister who couldn't quite get her act together. That's not support. It's condescension dressed up as concern. The table fell silent again. Several family members looked uncomfortable, perhaps recognizing their own roles in perpetuating the dynamic I was describing. I didn't come here to attack anyone, I continued, softening my tone. I understand that from the outside, my privacy might seem like secretiveness or even deception. But try to see it from my perspective. When you've spent years being treated as the family disappointment, watching your choices being questioned, at every turn, you learn to protect the parts of yourself that matter most. Maya reached over and squeezed my hand. I should have been a better ally, she said quietly. I knew how hard you were working, even if I didn't understand exactly what you were building. I squeezed back, grateful for her support. You were one of the few who ever asked real questions, I assured her. Uncle Robert sighed deeply. I think we all need to acknowledge that perhaps we've taken Alexandra for granted over the years, made assumptions that weren't fair. Several nods around the table, though Vanessa remained rigid, her expression unreadable. So what happens now? Ethan asked, looking between Vanessa and me. Is this the part where everyone apologizes and hugs it out? A few nervous chuckles broke the tension. I smiled slightly. I'm not looking for apologies, Ethan. I'm looking for understanding. And maybe a fresh start where my choices and achievements are respected on their own terms, not measured against someone else's yardstick. I think that's reasonable, Uncle Thomas said, speaking up for the first time. And perhaps long overdue. Vanessa pushed back her chair abruptly, the legs scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. Excuse me, she said tightly, standing up. I need some air. She walked out of the dining room, her back ramrod straight. After a moment's hesitation, Greg followed, throwing an apologetic glance toward Uncle Robert. An uncomfortable silence descended on the table. Aunt Patricia looked, torn between following her niece and remaining to manage the family's reaction. Perhaps I should check on her, she said, half rising. Let her have a moment, Uncle Robert advised. This is a lot to process for everyone. I felt a complex mix of emotions, satisfaction that the truth was finally out, sadness for the years of misunderstanding, concern about the pain my revelations had clearly caused Vanessa. Despite everything, she was still my sister. I had wanted honesty, not humiliation. I should talk to her, I said, setting my napkin beside my plate and standing. Maya caught my wrist. Are you sure? She might not be in a receptive mood. Probably not, I agreed. But I didn't come here to create a permanent rift. I came to establish boundaries and honesty. That means having difficult conversations, not just making statements and walking away. Uncle Robert nodded approvingly. The back garden, he said. That's where she usually goes to cool off. I made my way through the kitchen and out the back door, where the garden was illuminated by strings of soft lights hung among the trees. Vanessa stood at the far end, arms wrapped around herself, staring out into the darkness beyond the property. Greg was nowhere to be seen. Perhaps she'd sent him away. As I approached, the motion-activated path lights illuminated my steps. Vanessa turned at the sound, her face showing surprise followed by wariness. Coming to gloat? She asked, her voice brittle. I stopped a few feet away, giving her space. No, I just wanted to make sure you're okay. She laughed, a sharp, humorless sound. Oh, I'm fantastic. My entire family now thinks I'm the villain in this story. The terrible sister who bullied poor, successful Alex. It's quite a reversal, isn't it? That's not why I spoke up, I said. This isn't about making you look bad or elevating myself. It's about finally being honest about our dynamic. Honest? She turned fully toward me now, her expression fierce. You want honesty? Fine. Yes, I dismissed your work. Yes, I probably made you feel less than. But do you have any idea what it's like to have been the star of the family for years, the one everyone expected great things from, only to watch your younger sister quietly build an empire while you're struggling to maintain appearances? The raw vulnerability in her voice caught me off guard. This wasn't the defensive Vanessa I was used to. This was something more genuine, more wounded. I didn't know you were struggling, I said quietly. She waved a dismissive hand. Of course. You didn't. No one does. Greg's firm is downsizing. The private school tuition for the kids keeps increasing. The country club membership, the charity committees, the summer camps. It all costs more than you'd think. We're not broke, but we're overextended. The Hamptons house was supposed to be an investment, something to show the partners at Greg's firm that we're still on solid ground. I absorbed this information, seeing Vanessa in a new light. All her status symbols, her careful curation of the perfect life. They weren't just about superiority or appearances. They were a defense against fears of falling behind. I didn't know, I repeated, genuinely surprised by this revelation. You always made everything seem so perfect. That was the point, she said bitterly. And now everyone knows. Not just that my little sister is wealthier and more successful than I'll ever be, but that I needed her help and was refused. I stepped closer, the garden lights casting both our faces in soft illumination. Vanessa, I didn't refuse because I wanted to hurt you. I refused because our relationship has been broken for a long time, and throwing money at it wouldn't fix the underlying issues. She turned away slightly, but not before I caught the shimmer of tears in her eyes. So instead, you humiliated me in front of the entire family. That wasn't my intention, I said gently. But maybe this forced honesty is what we needed. We've been playing roles for so long. You as the perfect, successful sister and me as the struggling disappointment. Neither was ever completely true. For a long moment, Vanessa was silent, her breathing slowly steadying as she gathered herself. When she finally spoke, her voice had lost its defensive edge. Do you know what Mom told me when you started college? She asked unexpectedly. She said, make sure Alex doesn't get lost in those computer labs. She needs you to show her how to succeed in the real world. I winced at the memory of our mother's well-intentioned but limiting perspective. And you took that responsibility seriously. I did, Vanessa admitted. Maybe too seriously. Maybe I convinced myself that my way was the only way to measure success. She turned to face me fully. And then you went and succeeded beyond anything I could have imagined without following any of the rules I thought were essential. Different paths, I offered, neither inherently better than the other. She laughed softly, the sound more genuine than before. Easy for you to say from your penthouse apartment. I smiled despite myself. Fair point. Another silence fell between us, but this one felt different. Less hostile, more contemplative. I'm sorry, Vanessa said finally, the words clearly difficult for her. For dismissing your work, for treating you like you were less than, for calling you useless when you wouldn't give me the money. The apology, unexpected and unforced, caught me by surprise. Thank you, I said simply. That means a lot. Don't get too excited, she warned, a hint of the old Vanessa returning. I'm still mad about the vacation house. I'm not giving you money for a vacation house, I reiterated, but without heat. I know. She sighed, running a hand through her perfectly styled hair. But maybe we could talk about the kids' college funds. Not now, she added quickly. But someday, when we've figured out how to be sisters again, I nodded slowly. That's something we could discuss. Educational opportunities are actually aligned with the Foundation's mission. She rolled her eyes, but there was a hint of a smile. Of course they are. Always the practical one. From the house, we could hear voices drifting out, the family no doubt speculating wildly about our garden confrontation. Vanessa glanced back, toward the warm light spilling from the windows. We should go back in, she said, before they send a search party. In a minute, I replied. There's something else I want to say first. I took a deep breath. I kept my success private for complex reasons, partly to protect myself from judgment, partly because I valued the separation between my work and family life. But I also think, on some level, I was avoiding this exact confrontation, avoiding forcing us to recalibrate our relationship. Vanessa nodded slowly. It was easier to maintain the status quo, even if it wasn't healthy. For both of us, I agreed. But I don't want to hide anymore, and I don't want us to be estranged. I just want an honest relationship based on mutual respect. Is that even possible after everything? She asked, genuine uncertainty in her voice. I don't know, I admitted. But I think it's worth trying. Vanessa studied me for a long moment, then extended her hand. Truce? I looked at her offered hand, then stepped forward and hugged her instead. After a moment of surprise, she returned the embrace, a bit stiffly at first, then with genuine warmth. When we pulled apart, both our eyes were damp. Truce, I agreed. As we walked back toward the house, Vanessa's pace slowed. Just so we're clear, she said, her tone deliberately casual. When this Forbes article comes out, I'm telling everyone I knew about your success all along. I was just respecting your privacy. I laughed, recognizing this for what it was. Not manipulation, but Vanessa's way of preserving her dignity. I wouldn't expect anything less. And I want to be invited to any fancy foundation galas. I have dresses that need to be worn. Done. I agreed easily. Though you might have to actually listen to presentations about rare disease research, she shrugged. Small price to pay for open bar and networking opportunities. We paused at the back door, about to rejoin the family, whose understanding of both of us had been fundamentally altered tonight. Ready? I asked. Vanessa straightened. Her shoulders adjusted her expression to something approaching her usual confidence. They're probably expecting a cat fight. Should we disappoint them or give them what they want? Let's disappoint them, I suggested. It'll be good practice for everyone, learning that the story they expect isn't always the one they get. We stepped back into the warmth of the house, side by side for the first time in years. I realized that revealing my net worth hadn't just changed how my family saw me. It had changed how I saw myself. No longer defined by Vanessa's shadow or my family's limited expectations, I was finally standing in the full light of my own accomplishments. And surprisingly, Vanessa was standing there with me, both of us finally seeing each other clearly, perhaps for the first time. The Forbes article was released on a Tuesday morning. I woke to a flood of notifications, congratulatory texts from friends, emails from colleagues, interview requests from other publications. Michael called before I'd even finished my first cup of coffee, his voice electric with excitement. It's everywhere, Alex. The digital version just dropped, and it's already trending. The Foundation's website traffic is up 300% since midnight. I sat at my kitchen island, scrolling through the article on my tablet. Elaine had done a beautiful job, focusing primarily on the Foundation's work while weaving in elements of my personal journey. There was a photo of me in the Foundation's offices, surrounded by the wall of patient letters, and another of me at home, looking out over the city skyline. Tasteful, professional, honest. My phone buzzed with a text from Maya. You look amazing. In those photos. Officially the family's most eligible bachelorette billionaire. Lunch next week to celebrate? I smiled, typing back a quick confirmation. Then, taking a deep breath, I opened the family group chat that had been suspiciously quiet all morning. The silence broke almost immediately. Aunt Patricia. Just saw the Forbes piece, Alexandra. Very impressive. You must come speak at my women's club next month. Uncle Robert. Our Alexandra making the family proud. Who would have thought all those hours on the computer would lead to this? Don't tell your uncle I said this, but I always knew you were the smart one. Cousin Ethan. Holy crap, Alex is famous. Can I get your autograph before you get too important for us regular folks? And then, finally, from Vanessa. Congratulations on the feature, Alex. The Foundation's work is truly inspiring. Family dinner at our place this weekend to celebrate? Kids are dying to hear about their cool aunt who's in a magazine. I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the screen. This was new territory. Vanessa inviting me to her home, acknowledging my success publicly, positioning herself as my proud older sister. Part of me wondered if this was just another adaptation, another way of aligning herself with my suddenly public achievements. But then I remembered our conversation in Uncle Robert's garden, the glimpse of genuine vulnerability beneath her polished exterior. Perhaps this was her way of extending an olive branch, of taking a step toward the honest relationship we'd talked about building. I typed back, "Thanks, everyone. Still the same Alex, just with better press coverage. And yes to dinner, Vanessa. I'll bring dessert." Later that day, as I left a foundation board meeting, I passed a newsstand where the print edition of Forbes was already on display. My face looked back at me from the cover, alongside the headline, "The Silent Innovator: How Alexandra Reeves Built a Health Tech Empire While Staying Out of the Spotlight." I bought a copy, tucking it into my bag without opening it. I didn't need to read it again to know what it said. The story it told was accurate but incomplete, focused on my professional journey, but missing the parallel personal one that had been equally challenging and transformative. That evening I stood in my penthouse, looking out at the city lights coming alive against the darkening sky. My phone buzzed with a text from Zoe. "Saw the article. So proud of you. The world finally sees what I've known for years." I smiled, typing back, "Thanks for always seeing it, even when I couldn't." Setting down my phone, I realized that the greatest wealth I'd accumulated wasn't in my bank accounts or investment portfolios. It was in the truth that had finally set me free, the understanding that my worth had never been determined by my sister's approval or my family's recognition. It had been there all along, in the work I'd built, the lives I'd touched, and the woman I'd become. Sometimes the most valuable revelations aren't about net worth at all. They're about self-worth, and those can't be measured in dollars or magazine features. They can only be felt in moments like this, standing in the quiet certainty that you are, finally and completely, enough.